I grew up believing that sisters were supposed to be best friends for life. We fought over toys as children, borrowed each other's clothes as teenagers, and even shared secrets in the quiet of the night when the world outside felt too cruel. I never thought that the very person I trusted most would become the knife in my back. The one who would rob me of my inheritance and try to poison my marriage. Her name is Claire. My older sister by just 2 years. Yet she always carried herself as if the world owed her more because she came first. My parents doted on us both, but where I was content with simple joys, Claire had an appetite for more. More attention, more control, more money. Our father, a hardworking businessman, built his fortune from nothing. He started with a tiny repair shop and turned it into a chain of successful hardware stores. By the time we were grown, he had provided us a comfortable life, one that included private schools, vacations abroad, and a beautiful family estate that had been in our family for generations. But the one thing he valued most wasn't money, it was honor and loyalty. When he passed away, grief crushed me. I had been a daddy's girl, and the thought of never hearing his laugh again or seeing his warm smile broke me in ways I didn't think I could recover from. My mother was fragile with sorrow, barely speaking, while Claire put on her usual mask of strength. But I should have known better. Her calmness wasn't from strength. It was calculation. The reading of the will was supposed to be a formal closure, a way to honor my father's wishes. The lawyer unfolded the papers, his voice steady as he read aloud. My father had been fair, he split everything equally between us. The estate, the business shares, the savings, everything was to be shared 50-50. I remember relief washing over me. It wasn't about the money, it was about fairness. That was Dad, always equal. But then something strange happened. The lawyer cleared his throat and announced that, according to the documents submitted, the majority of the estate, including the house, was already signed over to Claire months before Dad's passing. What? I gasped, unable to process his words. That's impossible. Dad would never, he promised. Claire sat there, lips curled into the faintest smile. He changed his mind, Emily, she said smoothly. He wanted me to take care of everything. You're married now, you have your own life. It makes sense. It felt like the ground had vanished beneath me. My hands trembled as I tried to argue, but the documents were there, stamped and notarized. My father's signature, his very handwriting, seemed to be staring back at me, mocking me. I knew something was wrong. My father would never leave me with nothing. He had always told me he wanted both his daughters to stand on equal footing. My gut screamed that Claire had manipulated him, maybe even forced him when he was sick and vulnerable. After the will was finalized, I felt like a guest in the house I had grown up in. Claire wasted no time in asserting her ownership. She redecorated, replaced family photos with her own portraits, and locked up Dad's study so I couldn't enter. My inheritance, my memories had been ripped away. But she wasn't done. No, stealing the estate wasn't enough for her. She began hovering around my husband, Daniel. At first I brushed it off. Daniel was kind, always polite, and I knew he wouldn't be swayed by her sugary tone or fake sympathy. But Claire knew how to plant seeds of doubt, how to slip poison into the cracks of a marriage. She started small. Oh, Emily is so emotional these days. She always was the sensitive one, wasn't she, Daniel? She'd say it with a laugh, but her eyes lingered, sharp and calculating. Then she escalated, dropping by our house unannounced, calling Daniel for advice, and constantly reminding him of how unfair life had been to her. One evening, I walked into the kitchen to find her leaning too close to him, her hand brushing his arm as she whispered something that made him chuckle uncomfortably. My stomach twisted. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice sharper than intended. Daniel looked startled, quickly pulling back. "Nothing, we were just talking." Claire tilted her head, smiling innocently. "Don't be so paranoid, Emily. Not everything is about you." Her words stung deeper than I wanted to admit. She had already stolen my inheritance. Was she now trying to steal my husband too? That night, as I lay awake beside Daniel, I realized something crucial. Claire wasn't going to stop. She had tasted power and wanted more. If I didn't fight back, she would destroy everything. My marriage, my family, my life. I thought about my father's words, honor and loyalty. Claire had betrayed both. And though I was broken, something inside me sparked. A fire I didn't know I had. I would not let her win. The war between sisters had just begun. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. Every time I visited the estate, I felt like an outsider trespassing on my own memories. Claire walked the halls with an air of victory, like a queen who had conquered new land. And I, her sister, her equal, was reduced to a shadow. But what hurt more than losing the estate was watching her slowly weave her poisonous web around my marriage. Daniel tried to reassure me. Emily, don't let her get to you. He's just... Claire. You know how she is. But he didn't see what I saw. He didn't see the way her eyes lingered on him, like she was testing the waters, measuring how much she could take. She had stolen my inheritance. Now she was circling my marriage like a vulture, waiting for a chance to strike. It started with little comments. She always takes everything so personally, doesn't she, Daniel? She said once when I was in the room, pretending her words were a harmless joke. Another time she laughed softly as she poured him a glass of wine. You deserve better company than all this drama. Don't you ever get tired? Each word was like acid, eroding the trust one had built with my husband. I tried to ignore it, but doubt began whispering at the edges of my mind. What if she succeeded? What if Daniel, kind, steady Daniel, started to believe her? One evening I confronted him. Do you not see what she's doing? She's trying to drive a wedge between us. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Emily, I think you're letting your anger cloud your judgment. She's your sister. Maybe she just wants to connect. Connect. I snapped. Daniel, she stole everything Dad left me. And now she's suddenly calling you, dropping by uninvited, making these little digs at me. How can you not see it? He frowned, looking torn. I just don't want to believe she'd go that far. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting Claire. I was fighting the doubt she was planting in Daniel's heart. Things escalated when Claire hosted a dinner at the estate. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go with Daniel. I thought maybe if I showed strength, if I refused to back down, she would lose her power. But Claire knew exactly how to twist the knife. The dining room was filled with family, friends, neighbors, and people who had adored my father. She played the perfect hostess, gracious, charming, radiant. At one point she raised a glass and said, "To family and to Daniel, who's been such a source of support through all this. I don't know what I'd do without him." The room clapped politely, but I froze. Support? What did she mean by that? My eyes darted to Daniel, who looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Later, when I confronted her in private, her mask slipped. She smirked. Oh, don't look so worried, little sister. Men like Daniel. They like women who don't cry over spilled milk. They like women who take charge. Stay away from my husband, I warned, my voice shaking with rage. She leaned closer, her perfume choking me. Or what? You couldn't even protect your inheritance. What makes you think you can protect him? That night I cried in silence. Not because I believed Daniel would betray me, but because I could feel the cracks forming. Trust is fragile. And Claire was an expert at breaking fragile things. The following weeks were worse. She started calling Daniel late at night, pretending it was about estate business. She conveniently forgot to include me in family matters, choosing instead to ask him for help. Each time he insisted it was innocent, but the distance between us grew like a widening canyon. Then came the worst blow. One afternoon I overheard two of my father's old friends whispering at the market. Did you hear? Claire says Daniel's the only reason she's getting through this grief. Poor thing, leaning on her brother-in-law like that. I felt sick. She wasn't just undermining me privately, she was shaping a narrative, painting me as weak and unstable while casting herself as the victim, leaning on Daniel for support. She was tarnishing my reputation and making him look complicit. I realized then that this wasn't about affection or attraction. It was about power. She didn't want Daniel because she loved him. She wanted him because he was mine. For the first time in my life I hated my sister. Truly hated her. She had already robbed me of my father's legacy. Now she was trying to erase me from my own marriage. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't as fragile as she thought. Claire had drawn first blood. She thought she was winning. But I was done being her victim. The time had come to fight back. I had spent weeks drowning in Claire's games. Her whispers, her lies, her endless attempts to turn Daniel against me. But one night as I sat alone in the quiet of our living room, I remembered my father's words. Emily, strength isn't about winning battles. It's about choosing not to be defeated. Claire thought she had broken me. But she had only awakened a part of me I didn't know existed. She wanted war, I would give her one. The first step was finding proof. I started quietly watching, listening, piecing together her moves. Every late-night call, every fabricated story, every attempt to drag Daniel into her schemes. I wrote it all down. I kept a private journal where I recorded dates, times, the names of anyone who had seen or heard something suspicious. I saved text messages in a folder on my phone and backed them up to a secure cloud drive. When voicemails arrived, those sweet coaxing calls Claire made at odd hours, I saved them. I learned how to download call logs. I asked discreet questions of family friends, the ones who had always been fond of my father, knowing they might have noticed things Claire said in private. What I discovered shook me to my core. The documents that transferred the estate to Claire? Forged. She had maneuvered through the last foggy days of my father's life, bringing papers, suggesting signatures, insisting certain formalities be just taken care of. My father had been weak then, on medication that made him confused, sometimes unable to finish sentences, and Claire had used that vulnerability like a tool. A lawyer friend of mine reviewed copies I managed to get and frowned as he compared signatures. "This isn't right," he said. When he was healthy he wrote differently. "This looks like it was traced." She manipulated him when he was vulnerable. The truth lit a cold fury inside me. She hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my father's final wishes and turned them into a lie. Rage, mingled with grief, fueled a determination I hadn't felt since I was a child, training for a school play and refusing to cry no matter how the director yelled. No, this time I would not be an actor. I would orchestrate the ending. But I could not rush. Claire thrived on spectacle and would twist any outburst into proof that I was unstable, justifying her cruelty. So I moved like water, silent, patient, gathering evidence until my case was not a feeling but a mountain of facts. When she called Daniel late at night, I didn't glare or beg. I let them speak while I recorded. When she dropped by to help and made casual, undermining remarks, I invited witnesses. I learned the art of asking the right questions in the right company, how to nudge an aunt into repeating something Claire had said at a lunch, how to make a neighbor recount a late-night visit that sounded innocent on its face but read poison between the lines. One evening I followed Claire's pattern deliberately. She cornered Daniel in the estate garden, leaning close, voice low, her words honey-coated with implication. "Daniel, you deserve so much better than Emily's constant drama," she murmured. "If I were your wife, I'd never take you for granted." I stayed in the shadow of the lemon tree and recorded the entire exchange, heart thudding, palms slick. When I later played it back for Daniel, he went pale. "Emily, how did I not see this?" he whispered, shame and regret in his voice. "I should have listened to you." From that fractured beginning came a reconnection. He apologized for doubting me, for letting Claire's insinuations creep in. We talked until dawn, leafing through years of shared memories to rebuild trust brick by brick. He promised to stand by me, not out of pity but out of choice. And that promise became the foundation of every step I took next. Armed with recordings, saved messages, witness statements, and my lawyer friend's analysis of the forged documents, we filed suit to challenge Claire's claim to the estate. My lawyer warned that family law was often messy and that Claire would fight viciously. "She'll make it personal," he said. "She'll accuse you of being bitter, of trying to take everything from her. Be prepared." I was prepared. In the days leading to the hearing, Claire tried to intimidate and charm in equal measure. She called mutual friends with flowing stories about how I had become unreasonable since Dad's death, and she sent private messages to community members painting herself as a grieving daughter who needed support. I watched as, in some circles, the narrative tilted back toward her. It stung. But the more she performed, the more careless she became. Her confidence begot sloppiness. A late-night message meant for Daniel ended up in a group chat. A phone call she thought had ended was picked up on another line. Humans make mistakes when they think they are untouchable. Then came the courtroom. Claire arrived like an actress stepping onto a stage. Poised, composed, the image of sorrow refined into something marketable. The room was crowded with faces from our town, people who had known my father and, I realized painfully, people whose sympathies had been swayed by Claire's performance. My palms sweated as we sat, but Daniel's hand around mine calmed me more than any breath could. My lawyer laid out the case with methodical, cutting clarity. He produced the call recordings, highlighted inconsistencies in dates and deposits, and showed the expert testimony that indicated the signature on the so-called transfer papers had been traced. It was painstaking, each small revelation chiseling away at the facade Claire had built. The most damning moment was when we played the garden recording. Claire's smooth, seductive voice echoed off the courtroom walls. "If I were your wife, I'd never take you for granted." The phrase hung in the air like a bell tolling. Her composure finally cracked. A tightness, a flare of indignation surfaced in her eyes. She tried to smile it away, but it didn't fit anymore. The judge listened to both sides with an expression that kept me from crumbling. He cross-examined witnesses, asked for clarifications, and then, in a slow, precise voice, delivered his ruling. The documents granting Claire majority control were declared invalid. The judge determined they had been procured while my father was mentally incapacitated and that elements of the signatures were inconsistent with his known hand. The estate would be divided as originally intended. Relief washed over me, so hot and immediate it almost hurt. But the verdict was more than a legal win. It reclaimed the truth of my father's intentions. It declared officially that he had not been manipulated into abandoning fairness. The justice of that recognition felt like a balm over a raw wound. Claire did not accept defeat easily. She lunged at me outside the courtroom, words sharp as knives. "You think this is the end?" she snarled. "You'll never be rid of me. I'll ruin you." Her voice vibrated with a mixture of panic and rage I had never heard before. She was no longer the poised queen. She was a cornered animal. I met her glare without flinching. "You already tried," I said, my voice steady. "You failed. You can keep clawing at whatever lies you want to live in, but people know now. You betrayed our father. You betrayed your sister. That won't be washed away by more lies." She left, fury in her stride, and for the first time I saw her as merely mortal, capable of error, susceptible to consequence. The community's whispers that had once crushed me began to turn in the opposite direction. People I had feared had been lost to me were quiet. Others who had doubted me offered apologies. Invitations to social events, however much they felt shallow, started to arrive again. Business contacts who had distanced themselves returned with tentative handshakes. The fallout was real for Claire. Where once connections fed her, those same people now avoided her. Contracts were rescinded. Friends who had been complicit in her performance started to step back. There is a loneliness that follows someone who betrays trust. One that money and charm cannot buy away. In private, the reconnection with Daniel deepened into something saner and more honest than before. We rebuilt our marriage not on denial of what had happened but on the truth of what we had survived. There were hard conversations about why doubt had crept in, about how we could protect ourselves from manipulators in the future. There were also quiet, tender evenings where we drank tea on the estate porch, letting the cool night settle like forgiveness around us. Once the legal matters were settled, I made choices about the estate. I wanted it to carry my father's name, but I also wanted it to be useful, to be more than a prize. We converted part of the house into a small community workshop where local craftspeople could teach skills my father had valued. Carpentry, repair, creating things with your hands. Daniel helped organize classes. Neighbors volunteered. The house filled with life again, not with photos of people who had taken advantage of the family, but with laughter and the clack of tools and the occasional smell of fresh bread from the kitchen. Felt like restoring a temple. As for Claire, life narrowed. She tried to rebuild, first with anger, then with attempts at bargaining, but bridges burned cannot always be rebuilt. Some of our family tried to reach out. A few interactions were awkward and polite. For a time, she lived in a quiet, simmering bitterness that I allowed myself to observe without malice. I did not want vengeance the way she had practiced it, cruel and consuming. What I wanted had always been simpler. The truth to be known, my father's wishes honored, my marriage intact. In the months that followed, I found myself thinking about the cost of all we'd endured. Trust, once fractured, is a mosaic, beautiful but different. I had lost the idea of an uncomplicated sister, replaced now by the knowledge that people can change in small, corrosive ways when hunger for power convinces them it is justified. I had learned to recognize manipulation and to hold careful boundaries. I had also learned that strength was not the same as hardness. It was steadiness, a capacity to respond with clarity rather than reactivity. One evening, as the sun sank low and gilded the workshop windows, Daniel took my hand and said softly, "You rose through something terrible and came out clearer, kinder, stronger." He kissed my knuckles and smiled that unassuming smile I had fallen in love with years ago. I felt my father's presence like an echo, proud perhaps that his daughters would, in the end, honor what mattered. Claire had wanted everything: the house, the money, the narrative. She believed she could remake the world in the image of her appetite. Instead, she taught me the contours of my own resilience. She had tried to steal my inheritance and to destroy my marriage, but she had failed at both. What she could not take was what we rebuilt: truth, community, and a small, stubborn happiness that thrived in the places she could not control. The sweetest part of that victory was not the court ruling or the restored estate. It was sitting one afternoon on the front steps, watching neighbors walk by with bags of supplies for the workshop, hearing children laugh in the yard, and knowing that something my father had loved, the idea of craftsmanship, of honest work, had returned to life. Claire had taken much, but she had not taken the capacity for renewal. I would always carry scars: the memory of betrayal, the hollow ache where grief had lived. But I also carried lessons about who I was, about what I would tolerate, about the kinds of strength that matter. And when I looked at Daniel, at the small community that gathered in that house, I knew we had more than what could be signed away on a forged sheet of paper. We had something that deserved protection, not from lawsuits or confrontation, but from the small, indifferent cruelties the world sometimes offers. Sometimes revenge gets imagined as a spectacle, a shouted phrase, a public humiliation. Mine had been quieter. It was documentation, patience, relentless truth. It was watching a lie unravel and not being afraid to stand in the sunlight when it did. That, in the end, was justice enough.